monthly meeting of the Hendersonville City Council, February 28th, 2024. First item of business is consideration of the agenda. Is there anything anyone would like to have added to the agenda? Sorry. If not, a motion to approve.
Madam Mayor, I motion to approve the agenda.
Okay, is there any discussion? Those in favor of the agenda as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say no. Ayes have it. All right, got that taken care of. Two items. First is a presentation of City of Hendersonville water distribution and water treatment facility master plans. Okay, Adam, you're going to run with this one, huh?
Yeah, and I'm actually just going to introduce
okay.
consultants Hazen and Sawyer, but I wanted to tee it up and, just this, we as a utility play a, master planning is very important for our utility system. Our assets last a very long time. We still have water pipes in the ground that are over 100 years old. So it's very important that we're planning for these assets because once they go in, they have very long useful lives. Part of this study was actually funded by a grant, and it actually completes our master planning regimen of the city. So we've got a master plan for the water plant, wastewater plant, sewer collection system, and the water distribution system. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jared Hosteller and Crystal Broadbent with Hazen and Sawyer. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you. See if I can figure out how. So can I? Yes, I can. All right, fantastic. So I'm Jared Hosteller. I've been with Hazen for about 8 years. I'm an associate. We both sit in the Raleigh, North Carolina office. With me today is Crystal Broadbent, who's been with Hazen for about 23 years. She focuses generally on things outside the fence, pipelines and surge modeling and things like that, and I tend to focus on things inside the fence. So I'm going to talk about the water treatment facility today, and Crystal will talk about the distribution system. Hazen and Sawyer, which we affectionately call Hazen, is a company formed in 1951. We're headquartered in New York City. We have about half a dozen offices in the Carolinas, and we, again, are both in Raleigh. So meeting agenda today, just some things we want to cover are kind of what is a master plan, what are our goals and drivers in these efforts. We want to talk about system demands and all the growth that I'm sure you're all well aware of. I'll talk about the water treatment facility, and Crystal will cover the water distribution system. So this is the first water treatment facility master plan, but it is an update for a distribution system master plan that Crystal developed 2017?
2017, 2018.
Yep. So we're looking at every component in the system, and again, our goals are to plan for growth. We want to look at redundancy and resiliency and managing risk, mitigating risk where we can, improving system capacity, optimizing operations, ISO ratings that Crystal can speak to. We want to provide preliminary engineering for developing projects, and ultimately identifying these major capital improvements that we can roll into the city's budget. So the drivers for the water treatment facility for these capital improvement projects or CIPs include capacity expansion needs and the ability to meet future demands. We're going to talk about replacing aging equipment, rehabbing facilities like structures that are in need of that, reducing risk for process and personnel where we can, and then improving operations and efficiency. And then on the distribution side, improving pressures in the system, providing connectivity with additional pipelines where needed so we don't have just branches out in the system that are not looped, fire flows, and then meeting future demands. And with that, I'll turn it to Crystal.
Yep. So talking about future demands, so to figure this out, we first look at your current service area on the water system. It's pretty extensive. It is this yellow shaded area. We met and had several meetings with both the city as well as the county to determine where the future service area boundary should be, and that is depicted here as the pink boundary line. We use traffic analysis zones to identify where population growth as well as employment growth will occur. And I don't know if I can actually fancily move this thing. Probably not. That's all right. So over here on the left is the population density. As you can see by the colors, where the lighter the color is, the more growth is projected for the population. Employment, we wanted to make sure we accounted for employment because that is a little bit different than just where people are living, where they're actually going to be employed at. And then on top of that, the city knows where they have already approved development plans. And so we incorporated those developments that are already been approved are going to be in construction in the next 3 years or 4 years, as well as where there's going to be areas that could be ideal areas for industrial demand. So those three things together gives us our overall future demand projections. This is showing you growth from 2020 out to 2050. So the lighter the color, the less growth, and then the darker the blue, the more growth that we're expected to see in your area. And you guys probably live here, so you can vouch for where you're seeing this growth. What does this actually look like when it comes to demand? On the bottom is the projected year. Over on the left is finished water demands in gallons per day. The dots are the historical. So as of 2020, we were seeing about 7.51 average day demand. And we're going to be looking out, projecting that all the way out on average to 12.67. That average day demand considers what the TAS said, which is the orange line, the development demands, which is the red, and the industrial demand, which is the gray. And then we look at the historical peaking factor that the plant has experienced, and we apply that to the average day to make sure that we can handle that peak demand out in the system, and that's about 19 MGD by 2050. So just kind of looking at as it grows, if we flip through the slides, this is the projected average. Using a peaking factor of 1.5, we get to the max day. Looking at the finished water plants capacity, we do know we need to do some upgrading because they have to stay above that blue line. And then on the water treatment facility side, we're adding an additional 5th filter. And then you can see by right before 2030, a 6th filter needs to be improved. And before 2045, some new basins, filter buildings, and upsizing the finished water pumps. And Jared's going to dive into the water treatment facility.
So as many of you know, the water treatment facility is located on Haywood Road. I'm sure you've driven by it numerous times. Originally constructed in the mid-1960s with a number of subsequent major improvements. It's currently permitted to treat 12 million gallons per day. In 2023, the average daily flow, as Crystal indicated, was about 7.5, and the maximum daily flow was 9.5. And of course, the finished water is analyzed for a wide range of potential contaminants. Monitoring and reporting are conducted in accordance with state and federal guidelines. So we're going to just essentially step through from source to tap and talk about work our way through this process of review. So the first thing is our raw water screening and pumping facilities. So the facility is equipped with 4 raw water sources. The French Broad Intake and Pump Station is currently under construction and will be online later this year. The Mills River Intake and Pump Station is located essentially right at the intersection of 191 and 280 and is permitted for 12 MGD. And then the North Fork and Bradley Creek reservoirs are located in the Pisgah National Forest. They have a combined permitted withdrawal capacity of about 4.5 MGD, and then those flow by gravity down to the water plant. So the total permitted raw water capacity, big takeaway here, is that we've got north of 30 MGD of raw water capacity. Some improvements that we're recommending are that the air burst equipment would be replaced at the Mills River Intake and Pump Station. That just keeps the screens clean that sit in the river. Obviously nothing at the French Broad because it's still under construction. From the North Fork and the Bradley Creek reservoirs, we're recommending that those aging transmission mains, as Adam indicated, some of those in excess of 100 years old, are just recommending that those be inspected and assessed to confirm their remaining service life. Moving on to the splitter box and rapid mix. Yeah, absolutely. Back up. Sure.
I go over the Bradley Creek. What is it there that there's really intake lines, or is that all?
It's the lines from those reservoirs down into town.
Down in the town?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I think about 16, 17 total miles of line. Again, that's aging cast iron, in some instances about 100 years old.
Is it 2 lines that come together to make one, or do we
That's
have
correct.
2
Yeah, they
separate?
converge. They
Okay.
converge in Mills River. Yep.
Can I back up for a second?
Yeah.
So one of the things about cast iron that old is it's usually unlined cast iron, which means that it's turboculating and the actual space inside gets smaller and smaller over time.
So moving inside the fence, as we like to say at the water treatment facility, the splitter box and rapid mix basins. The splitter box is what receives all that flow from those various raw water sources, raw water treatment chemicals, including the coagulant, which is polyaluminum chloride that's added there. And then the flow is split to the east and west process basins. And then on the east and west, we have rapid mix basins, which are equipped with vertical mixers Interestingly, the plant staff realized that they don't need that mixing energy. They're getting the coagulation that they need without those mixers, so those mixers have been turned off in the interest of energy efficiency. Some recommendations here, we're recommending some interconnections of that raw water piping as it comes into the splitter box to provide some operational flexibility. Some minor structural repairs, you'll see a little bit of concrete wear here on the outside of the structure, and then increasing or extending piping on the west train during a future expansion phase. So essentially all the growth for future filters and basins will be on the western side of the water treatment facility due to space constraints, and so we'll need to extend piping that way. Moving on to the floc or flocculation basins. This is a mixing process, and really the goal here is to provide a certain amount of mixing time and mixing energy to agglomerate the raw water chemicals that we're adding with the particles in the water to create a larger particle that can then be settled out in the sedimentation basins downstream. The kicker here is that we need a certain amount of mixing time, and on the eastern side of the facility, we're not getting that. So we're recommending some retrofits to those eastern basins during a future expansion phase to provide that additional hydraulic retention time and address some minor structural issues as well. And then also, as I've indicated, new basins on the west to increase capacity there. Sedimentation basins, I like to call these giant swimming pools, no moving parts here. The goal is really just to provide quiescent conditions for those flocks to settle out, forming a sludge layer that's then removed periodically. The treatment capacity is determined by the basin geometry, so obviously you can only put so much flow through a certain size concrete box. The caveat to that is that we can add various technologies. This is a tube settler technology shown here on the left that essentially increases that effective settling area and allows us to push a bit more flow through that same geometry. So increases the capacity of the basins without needing to add more. So we're recommending that in one of the more near-term phases of expansion, and then new basins will need to be added well into the future on the west side of the facility. Some other minor structural issues that we noted, including some cracks and some mortar repair that needs to be conducted, and then some minor process efficiency improvements, including valve replacement, adding some portable cranes to raise and lower equipment into and out of the basins for maintenance and things like that. Moving on to the filters. I think we all know how a filter works, but we're removing particles here that have been carried over from the sedimentation basins. The media bed consists of layers of anthracite coal and sand. Chlorine is added here. This is the primary location where chlorine is added for disinfection of the water. And these filters are backwashed about a couple times a week on average. So there's a project underway currently to add a fifth filter that'll be placed into service in 2025, and that'll increase the rated filtration capacity to about 15 MGD. And then we're recommending a sixth filter be placed into service here in about the next 5 years to take us to 19 MGD of filtration capacity. And then well into the future, 7th and 8th filters will be required. Some other filter-related items, we're recommending that an additional backwash pump be furnished in the near term, and that provides redundancy for this critical process to keep that filter media clean. And this is kind of a recurring theme you'll see today is maybe we've got a single point of failure, a single pump, a single tank, something like that. Let's provide redundancy and resiliency by adding a standby. Additionally, in the future, as we add those new basins on the west side of the facility, we'll need to make room for a future filter building, and so we'll need to relocate the backwash air scour blowers that are also used to keep that media bed clean, and at that time we would recommend that they be replaced. So finished water storage. This tank is called Clearwell. It's 2 million gallons. It provides contact time for chlorine and the other finished water chemicals that are added. It also provides reserve storage volume, so it's essentially a large bucket we can pull from to fill the distribution system. So that's located just upstream of the finished water pump station. We're recommending that an additional 2 million gallon clear well be constructed, again for redundancy. That'll allow the existing clear well to periodically be brought down for maintenance. And then when that's done, when that new clear well is constructed, we recommend bringing that existing clear well down for maintenance, and at that time installing baffle curtains, which will provide chemical mixing, additional chemical mixing and contact time within the clear well by providing kind of a maze type of path that the water has to follow. So finished water pump station was recently upgraded here in the past 5 years. Obviously, this is what's pumping finished water into the distribution system, ultimately to customers. It's equipped with 4 finished water pumps and has a firm capacity of 18 MGD, which just means that with the largest pump out of service, we can get 18 MGD out the door. It's got an ultimate firm capacity of 24 MGD when we upsize those pumps. This pump station houses the backwash pump as well. So as we've discussed, we're recommending upsizing finished water pumps number 1 and number 2 in the future to provide 24 MGD of firm pumping capacity. There's some ancillary improvements here as well, some plumbing improvements, some minor structural improvements to be able to more easily facilitate the removal of equipment and get equipment in and out. And then a redundant finished water line that we're recommending, this would be routed from the finished water pump station through the yard to the transmission main on Haywood Road. And so that just provides a couple different ways of getting water out the door. In the event we have got a catastrophic failure of one of those lines, then we still have a way of getting water to customers. We looked long and hard at ways to improve energy efficiency at the water treatment facility, and the short story is that there's really no low-hanging fruit there. The plant's being operated really efficiently. We had a couple minor recommendations in terms of operating the finished water pumps in the most efficient way with pump combinations and speeds to minimize energy per unit volume that we're pumping out the door. But really not a lot that needs to be done or can be done to improve energy efficiency at the plant. So chemical storage and feed. There are 6 primary chemicals that are added to the treatment process. So again, polyaluminum chloride is added at the splitter box. This is the coagulant to form those flocks that we're then settling out. Sodium hydroxide is used for pH adjustment. Sodium bicarbonate is a major one used for alkalinity adjustment and corrosion control optimization in conjunction with orthophosphate, which is a corrosion inhibitor. We also have chlorine gas for disinfection, and then fluoride, which is added for dental health. So with respect to the sodium bicarbonate, we're recommending that an additional silo be constructed, again, for redundancy. This is a single point of failure. It's a critical process for the corrosion control optimization process. The existing feed equipment and the existing silo is at the end of its useful life and needs to be replaced. But before that, we would recommend that the additional silo be constructed. So we've got duty and standby mechanisms. Chlorine gas is used for disinfection, and unit prices nationwide have increased substantially in recent years. There's also been a number of potential supply chain interruptions that have been noted. So what we're recommending here is that a new chemical be constructed into the future to house temporary sodium hypochlorite storage and feed facilities, so bleach that could be used as an alternative disinfectant to the chlorine gas. This new facility could also house future tanks for something like orthophosphate. Some miscellaneous chemical improvements, spare metering pumps, some chemical transfer pumps to move chemical from a bulk tank to a day tank, and some minor structural improvements as well. And then finally, the treatment residuals. So the waste streams from the sedimentation basins and the filters flow by gravity to this sludge transfer pump station. The blended residuals are pumped from here to thickening and dewatering processes for ultimate disposal. And this station is equipped with a single pump that's approaching the end of its useful life. So again, in the interest of resiliency and redundancy, we're recommending that that existing pump be replaced and a second pump be installed to provide redundancy for this critical process. And then the little bits and bobs here at the end, some miscellaneous concrete and structural repairs that we've noted. Are recommending a new maintenance facility. I don't know how well you can see that center photo, but the plant staff have a very small area to store spare parts and to maintain equipment. So we're recommending a maintenance facility. And then some miscellaneous control system improvements to adjust some set points and provide some additional functionality. So again, looking at capacities, on the raw water side of things, we've got north of 30 MGD of ultimate capacity. As we go through the treatment process, 25, 26 MGD of treatment capacity through those process basins and filters. And then when we get to the finished water pump station, that's where we're essentially limited to 24 MGD by the nature of the firm pumping capacity of that station. So we're saying build out capacity of the water treatment facility is 24 MGD. And again, our maximum daily demand out to 2050, which is the end of the planning horizon, is about 19. Yeah.
Do the chemicals, are they priced at a certain price, or are there discounts for buying larger amounts of chemicals in bulk? And then if that is the case, then does it make sense to have larger storage space for purchasing the chemicals in bulk as opposed to?
It's a good question. Yeah, I think I'm not familiar with exactly how often Hendersonville negotiates those rates, but they're often negotiated, frequently every couple years. Some of those chemicals will degrade over time. So specifically sodium hypochlorite, if you have your storage tanks are too big over time, you're losing the activity of that chemical. So it's kind of a fine balance there. So we've tabulated here all these different capital improvement projects that we've noted, and I've got some cost estimates shown in 2023 dollars. The big ticket items here in this first phase, I guess we could say this 2020 to 2025 window, is the addition of that fifth filter, which is currently underway, and then the addition of a standby backwash pump. In the 2025 to 2030 window, I think it's about 29.3 million total, but the big ticket items again are the inspection of those aging transmission mains from the gravity or from the mountain reservoirs, basin retrofits, the addition of a sixth filter, second clear well, and then maintenance facility, and then the chemical building. So yeah, about 29.3 million there.
Did you,
Go ahead.
when you're talking about replacing those lines, will they have to be completely replaced or can they be lined?
Yeah,
or
I should specify, this is inspection and assessment.
Just the
So we
inspection?
looked at a variety of different technologies, and this is let me go back. That's a fairly conservative number for the inspection of those lines, but it is 16, 17 miles a line. So our recommendation would be to inspect the whole thing. There's, technologies that can be inserted and travel through the line. There's other ways of using ultrasonic technologies, from point A to point B. However, the city ultimately ends up tackling it. We'd recommend inspecting the full extent of those lines and then determining, are there areas that need to be replaced, or are we still good for another 20, 50 years?
Do we own the equipment that actually inspects the line, or do we rent or lease it?
It would be a third party that would come in to assist with that, yeah. Let's see. Yep, then off in the future, about 20 years out, another 16.1 or so million of estimated expenditures. And the big ticket items here are just the addition of those future basins and filters to accommodate future flows, as well as upsizing the finished water pumps. So kind of a graphic view here by timeline. So some significant capital expenditures in the next 5-10 years, specifically to address capacity expansion and to mitigate risk in a few cases. With that, I will give it back to Crystal.
Stop
Got a
there.
quick
Any
question on
Yeah,
the
question.
treatment plant from staff's perspective. How many of those projects, could you pull back to the last slide? Yeah, 50 or so million dollars. How much of that would be capacity related projects that could be funded through SDF's versus rates? And I just point out, this is just one aspect of the system, right? So this is just the treatment plant.
There's some drivers.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, I mean, we've got to tabulate it here. I don't have a percentage right off the top of my head, but we can certainly get that.
Okay.
So I think you guys will get these slides. So there's some drivers listed here on the tables to help determine which ones are which.
So relating to the capacity projects, when we calculate that system development fee amount, these projects or projects to expand capacity at the water plant, that goes into the system development fee calculation. If our ultimate capacity, I think in our calculation, we were going to 18 million gallons per day. So the projects that were needed to go to 18 million gallons per day, that capital expenditure is calculated in for that additional 6 million gallons per day at capacity. So they are allocated in the calculation. Okay. And there are additional capacity projects on that. This is just the treatment plant, right? As Brian alluded to, there are additional capacity projects in the distribution system, which Crystal will cover in a minute.
Any other questions on the water treatment facility?
I guess I would be remiss to say, if I didn't say, I'm from Hendersonville originally. My parents still live here and drink the water. So it's been an honor and a privilege to work on this project. And it's, as you well know, fantastic water, great water quality.
Oh, I keep going backwards. All right, here we go. All right. So this is your hydraulic model. We first built this model in 2015 with the support of the fire departments. One of the things we mentioned that we can utilize the model for is to assist the fire departments with their insurance ratings. And that requires a highly calibrated model. And we update calibration every couple of years to ensure that we're giving them the answers they need for their insurance. So the model is built from the GIS, and so the city provides us updated GIS. From that, we get the diameters of the pipe, the age of the pipe, the material of the pipe, and we bring that in, and that helps us determine what we call the roughness or the coefficient that determines how much loss is occurring in the pipe. So the downtown areas that have a lot of cast iron, it basically takes an 8-inch and makes it more like a 4-inch. Areas that have a lot of PVC stays the same size. We use the billing data to make sure that we are allocating the demand out to where the demand is actually occurring, so the water actually flows through the pipes as it really does. We add elevations to make sure we're getting the pressures correct. And then the model does the calculations for us, tells us where the flow is going and what the pressures are, how the pumps are performing, and what the tanks are doing. So one of the things that we do is calibrate the model. What we mean by that is we actually go to the field. This is just the 11 sites for this go around. We've done, I think, 11 sites every couple years. And we do fire flow tests. We open hydrants, we watch to see what the static residual was, what the static and what the residual was. We mimic that in the model and we calibrate the model, meaning we make changes to the model, whether it's closing a valve we think might be closed, and the city goes out and investigates to see if the valve was closed, or if we need to change C factors, or if there's some connection that we don't have correct in the model, we need to make correct. And as you can see, we calibrate within 5 PSI, and we're pretty much spot on with this model. The next thing we do is we want to make sure the controls are working correctly in the model. So we take the SCADA that we receive, and here is an example of a SCADA. The dots are the SCADA of how the tanks are behaving, and the solid line is how the model's predicting the same behavior. And so we do that for each pressure zone, and we make sure that the model is representing what's actually happening in the system. And that allows us to build confidence in the decisions that we make from the model. So in 2016, when we were doing this master plan last time, we identified areas that had low pressures, and the city since then has done projects to resolve these low pressures. The north side, they put a north side booster pump station in and a new elevated tank, and that brought the pressures up that were close to the 30 mark all the way up to like 60s as far as pressures go. Etowah was another area that struggled with some pressure issues. So since then, the Etowah pump station has come online, as well as the new elevated tank. Hebron was another like of expansion to resolve some of the low pressures near the UART tanks. And then Sugar Hollow was another expansion that resolved. You will still see some areas of low pressure in the south. In the prior master plan, we made some recommendations that we are also continuing to keep in this master plan, and we'll be showing that pressure zone change in a couple slides. Same areas are that we identified as low pressures also had low fire flow availability. This colors are based off of what is available at 20 PSI. And so anything that's red is telling us that, hey, you can't even get the 500 gallons per minute at this hydrant. A couple of reasons in your city for this is low pressures because of elevations or just small diameters. We can't really resolve the issues if they're elevations unless we create new pressure zone boundaries. So you can see again, the north side, we had low fire flow ability in 2016, but now because of the new pressure zone, we've resolved a lot of those fire flow issues by creating a new pressure zone boundary. Same thing with Etowah. The other thing the model can tell us is the age of the water. So as the model predicts the water moving through the system, and because of the demand being pulled out, it can tell you what the age is. So everything identified here in red and also circled in a box is telling us that the age in these pipes are pretty old. Doesn't mean necessarily that's bad water. It just means that the water's been sitting there in the pipe. So what we can utilize the hydraulic model for is coming up with a flushing program. It's a very specific flushing program called unidirectional flushing. It's very precise in how you open certain hydrants and close off systems. So you're flushing out the pipe at a high velocity and cleaning out any debris or anything issues. And so they have a plan to do that in each of these areas that report really high water age.
I have a question.
Yep.
How do you determine, like, if it's a boiling water advisory? I mean, how is that determined?
So usually that's when pressures go below 20 PSI. Is that what you guys do here? So it has to be below 20 PSI before they call it by alert. And usually your system never will see that. So when we get into the master planning and project out to 2050, one of the things we did in the master plan is looked at every single booster pump station in the system and compared it to the max day demand. The pumps have to be able to pump out what the maximum day demand is. You can't meet that just with your storage tanks. So this is just an example. So in 2050, the east side, which is the yellow area, the blue area is where your water treatment plant feeds into what we call the main zone. And the 2050 demand in east side is about 2.84 million gallons per day. The firm capacity of the east side pump is only 2, so we need additional pumping capacity. There is space at east side to add additional pump. However, we feel like it would be better to have a redundant pump station, not just rely on one, because that's the sole source for this entire community, and there's a lot of growth potential out there. And so we're recommending a Clear Creek pump station, also sized for 2 MGD. and a new transmission main to get the water over into the east side zone. So just real quick, also on this map, when you guys get back to look at it, we color coded by the pipe by the drivers. So the brownish colors are connectivity and redundancy. Yellow was to improve fire flow. Pink is to improve pressures, and green will be mostly just met by the developers when the demand calls for it. So on the north side, there's some major projects we're recommending. One is we have to be able to get the flow out of the treatment plant into the system. Right now it's a 24-inch down Hayward, so we're recommending a 36-inch, and then transferring after Rugby to a 30-inch all the way down to Ewart Hill tanks. A lot of that's going to be in conjunction with the DOT, so some of that cost will be just upsizing the cost from the 24 to the 36 or the 24 to the 30, depending on how it works within the DOT right away. Again, you can see the Clear Creek pump station. Talk about Long John Mountain in the next slide. The 16-inch to feed the Clear Creek pump station is currently an asbestos pipe. It's pretty old, so we recommend replacing it with upsizing it from, I think it's a 12 right now, to a 16, and actually improving that pipe material as well. You can also see here highlighted in the orange circle, the whole reason for those water lines is to improve pressures in that area. Right now, there's currently a little booster pump station that feeds some of this area. That will be removed by installing these water lines and also improving pressures down into an area that a lot of industry is coming into. So Long John Mountain. Currently, Long John Mountain has a series of booster pumps that go up the mountain to supply the demand. The idea is we can replace and abandon 11 of these pump stations, which I have here in red, and remove 2 of the tanks, which are also shown in red, and put a single booster pump station to a tank on top of the mountain, and then feed back down the mountain and through pressure reducing valves. We also suggest keeping check valves as it connects to the system that it currently is connected to. So when pressures do drop within this new pressure zone, water can come in for a fire. But this is a great improvement. It will save a lot of just maintenance, a lot of energy over time, because you're only dealing with one pump station and one tank and not a series of them any longer. So the southern improvements, I mentioned that you guys previously saw there was low pressure issues still in the south. This is where the new pressure zone comes in. I'm not sure what they're going to call it, just the south pressure zone, but I call the pump station the Crail Farm because it's on Crail Farm. And then a new elevated tank, which would be the Glassy Mountain Tank location. And this new pressure zone is kind of outlined in the dashed orange line, will improve pressures everywhere. The city will have to confirm that the existing tanks, pump stations that come off of this pressure zone will now have a new suction pressure. So there might be some changes that they need to do at some of the other pump stations, for example, Kenmore Green, Greenmore, or Claremont. This greatly improves pressures as well as also suction pressures at those pump stations because they're pretty low right now. The other circle up there where it has point to this is improved pressure. Those are very similar to, one of them is very similar to a project they did already. So it's just adding a new line to the pump station, then back feeding back over to an area that has really low pressures. Now that Town of Laurel Park is part of your system, we can use that elevation to actually remove a pump station that was going to be needed to meet some of those pressure demands by adding in just a connecting pipe. And then that 12-inch is just a really good connectivity, redundancy, and fire flow line for your system. It's a 4-inch along that route right now. So here's what the improved pressure map looks like. There are still some areas of low pressure. They're just because there's elevations. There's nothing much we can do about them. Most of those homes already have pumps to meet those. The available fire flow map, you can see that there's still some areas. Our goal was looking for 1,000. You're like, why do we see still orange? Well, Laurel Park has a lot of orange because they're just really small pipes. And until they go to replace those due to age or wear or breaks to larger size, you'll continue to see low fire flow availability there. And then down in the lower area, it's just a bunch of 8-inch, and you can only get so much water through an 8-inch. But it's all above 500. So the major outcomes of the water distribution master plan, 13 new pump stations. However, many of those are going to be driven by developments and not by the cities. There's really only 2 major pump stations that the utility has to oversee, plus a couple minor just changing the pumps within the station. 2 new storage tanks, 13 new pressure zones. We're going to abandon 11 pump stations, abandon 2 storage tanks, and about 200 miles of new pipe to meet the demands. So what I'm showing you is prices for the city projects that are driven by connectivity, redundancy, improving pressures, and significant fire flow improvements. These don't include the projects that are just driven by demand only. So in 2025, we're also giving a demand driver because we're used the year as a way for us to organize things, but it's really driven by what the demand is. So once we start seeing consistently 9.5 MGD max day within the treatment plant, these projects need to be under design, and some of them already are. So there's 1 tank and 1 pump station that's along John Mountain. So the total cost is $120 million, and then 17.5 of that is along John Mountain. In 2030, the demand driver will be 11.3 MGD. Well, there'll be 11 projects, 2 tanks. 1 is that really critical southern tank. The other tank is just if they wanted to improve systems, they can replace an existing tank and build one at a higher level at the same site. 3 pump stations, about 65.8 MGD, or $65.8 million. Getting my units mixed up. In 2035, at 12 MGD, there'll be 7 projects, 1 tank. Again, this is just a retrofit to another tank site to improve pressures. 79.5 million. In 24, around the 12.8 MGD, 2 projects. 1 is a pump station, and that's 21.4 million. Any questions?
Questions? A lot of data.
I think I hit you guys up a lot at the water and sewer meeting.
Yeah.
So
I don't know if you want to feel free to ask still.
I felt like I was adequately answered.
Okay.
First of all, I just had a real
Yeah.
quick thought. Could you go back to the slide with the 120?
Can I get back to the slides? Which way? What do you want?
120 million for
Yep.
2025. That also included the 191.
Yeah, that included the 36-inch along the DOT. So part of that, we were being conservative in our, so this includes if Hendersonville was to pay for the entire 36-inch water line, not an upsize with
Which
the
is going to be
DOT.
done as part of the DOT's 191 widening.
We just
project.
don't know which part is you, which part
Sure.
is not, so we just, we assume the worst.
And you said
then-
this is all outside the fence, is that
Yes.
what y'all call it?
Yes.
Just outside the fence.
Yep. So the 25 projects, so let me kind of go back. So coming out, I mean, the master plan report will have this all color coded by year, not by driver, but we wanted to show you by driver here. So the 36-inch coming out of the water treatment plant, there is some critical piping to support Etowah. There's some fire flow piping. Some of that pink piping out in the yellow area is going into 2025. That is to help us get rid of the schoolhouse, right? Schoolhouse pump station?
Or Sugarloaf.
Sugarloaf, yeah. Pump station. And so there's a list of what we identified as 25 projects. And then Long John Mountain and its tank. It's a long water line from the pump station up to the tank too. And we're looking at a 12-inch there.
Crystal, another thing that I think this came up at Water and Sewer Advisory, but a difference between the previous master plan to the new one was the east/north side and that Clear Creek station, the Balfour Parkway not happening.
Yes.
Impacted.
Yes. So we had so the last master plan Balfour was planned for, and so we were just going to follow that and put the new east side pump station along that route. Instead, what we're having to do is follow and replace that AC pipe and kind of wander through your system. So Rugby becomes really important to get water over there. Then you have this winding road over here. We're trying to we're trying to use your existing infrastructure. Where do you need to have it replaced anyways? Let's upsize it. And so it's kind of wandering over to support the new pump station. Whereas last time we had, I think, a 24 over and then a 16 all the way over. We don't have as much demand as we did in the prior master plan, and the service area also shrunk from the last master plan. So we're not serving as wide of an area. And so we don't have as many projects as we did in the prior master plan. And this is the benefit of doing master planning is you can revisit your assumptions, revisit your, where you think things are going and what the trends are. But the biggest thing that stuck from the prior master plan is Long John Mountain and the south area and the need for another pump station into East Side. And then just the supporting large transmission main from the treatment plant down to the UART tanks. So those are the biggest projects that stayed from both projects. But they've done a great job implementing what they, 4 of those projects really improved system pressures and fire flow. So getting those done was great.
And you all create the ISO maps
Yes.
for the fire departments
Yeah.
around the county.
And
so-
we're getting ready to update that in the next month or so, once we get updated GIS. So,
And that helps them out because they don't have to do flow testing on hydrants.
yeah, they don't have to go out, yeah.
Another question that was asked at Water and Sewer that I thought was interesting that I hadn't really considered is just like the automation portion of it and just the computerized portion. And is any of that included in any of the master planning?
Yeah,
Safety, security of the system, that kind of stuff?
yeah, we did a cursory evaluation of the instrumentation, the SCADA system, and it's strong. Again, we noted some minor functionality that needed to be added, like in some remote generators to make sure that's connected so operators can see what's going on if a generator kicks on or off out in the system. But in general, it's a good system that's well kept up.
And over time, they've added more SCADA out at their tanks and their booster pump station sites. So that I've seen an increase in number of understanding what's happening in each of the locations. I don't know if they have SCADA for every tank yet. We do. Okay.
Yeah, one of the first slides, the airburst equipment at the Mills River Pump Station, part of the driver there was SCADA connectivity and just making sure that operators can see that, so.
Anything else?
Who checks the cybersecurity for all of this? I don't know if you even touch that. If
I'm not sure, so the city's integrator is Fortec.
you're smiling, I want to know why you're smiling.
I was going to see how you're going to
Yeah. I was gonna say Fortec, but yeah.
Yeah. So, so Fortec is our systems integrator. So our main server is at the water treatment facility, and everything is pinging that server. And currently, we're installing a fiber network that will have direct connections to the water treatment plant, the wastewater treatment plant, and city operations. So it's a singular. It's hard for other folks to get into that line because it's just connected via fiber. And we are making improvements currently. We keep our servers up to date. The SCADA servers, they do get outdated every 4 or 5 years. So we're updating our servers. And I think we are looking at doing in the near future a cybersecurity assessment where we can find our weak points in our SCADA system.
Yeah, and that fiber Adam's mentioning is completely isolated from our existing fiber that's at the facility. So this is like a redundant line, essentially.
Anything else? All right. Thank you. Very much. We appreciate
Mayor,
that.
I'd just like to thank Adam and the team. They've
Yeah.
done a great job. And, we are putting a lot of money into the infrastructure of our water and sewer system and planning really well to keep it up to par, and really appreciate your work, Crystal. Y'all have done a great job. Just wanna
Well,
say
I
thanks.
appreciate working with these folks because they're great to work with and getting us the information we need and response time. So it's been a pleasure working with them.
Thank you all, everyone involved, pulling that together. Okay, next, a zoning text amendment regarding tree preservation and new planting requirements. Daniel.
Good afternoon. So this evening, we're presenting the proposed tree preservation ordinance. Obviously, this is just for a review and comment at this time. It's a land development ordinance, so it'll require a public hearing prior to adoption. A quick overview, as you know, the City Council created a tree ordinance study committee in April of last year, And the stated purpose there was to study and recommend ordinance provisions related to the preservation of the tree canopy within the city of Hendersonville. So there's a lot of different perspectives of the various members that were appointed to that committee. I was one of them, and they're on the screen there. A lot of staff, and then some folks from our business advisory committee, and then so there you go. And then a rough timeline of the development of the proposed ordinance. As I mentioned, the committee was created in April of last year. We had our first committee meeting at the end of May, and then pretty much monthly, the committee met to continually revise the working draft. And then we had a final version of the substance of that, the policy of the proposed ordinance that came out of that at the end of January. And so now we're presenting it. So it went to planning board earlier this month. Here we go, and a broad overview of what the ordinance does and doesn't address. It does address the preservation of existing trees. There are some expanded planting requirements, like street trees and common open space. The goal of that is to grow the city's canopy. It doesn't address other environmental issues. We didn't get into steep slopes. We didn't get into stream buffers. We didn't get into what the overall developed canopy percentage should be after you're done developing, you know, X percent, we want this much tree canopy in the city. We didn't get into that. And then why are we talking about tree preservation? It's in front of you all the time when you review a conditional rezoning, the idea of preserving trees. And there's good reasons we want trees in the city. Of course, improved air quality, prevents stormwater runoff, controls urban heat islands. It can conserve energy. There's economic and health benefits, of course, but we have to balance that. We want all the canopy we could possibly retain, except we got to respect private property rights. We got to respect the cost of developing, and especially as it affects affordable housing. How it might constrain development on small sites. Development's difficult in a lot of places in the city of Hendersonville just due to the terrain and the lack of developable land. And then being flexible for the same reason there. A note about how you measure canopy. Tree canopy is distinct from individual trees in that we're looking top down, and it's the outermost extent of the branches and stems and leaves. You may also hear it as the drip line. So if there's a blob of trees where the leaves and stems overlap, you're getting the net of that blob as shown in red. If there's big gaps between your trees, you're just getting the individual red dots. That's how you measure canopy. The tree canopy cover assessment. You may have heard of this document. It was a study done by a consultant hired by the city. Among other things, the main thing it does is to measure the amount of the city covered in tree canopy. I'm not an expert in this assessment. I wasn't super involved in the development of it, but it's important to note here because we are working from data developed as part of this assessment. So currently 35% of the city is covered in tree canopy. It looked at city limits and ETJ only. There's other things it measured. It measured possible planting area. It measured impervious area. It measured unsuitable planting area, like a baseball field where you technically could plant a tree, but it's unsuitable for some other reason. And the data it used, it analyzed the USDA's National Agricultural Imagery Program maps, and that takes an aerial shot of the city when when in the middle of the summer when the leaves are fully in, versus most of our imagery is in the winter because we want to see more of the stuff under the canopy. So, and then I provided it goes into a lot more detail than this, but I included this distribution of the existing canopy in the city. That's the various land uses where it's present. So residential single family comprises 37% of the existing canopy in the city. This is a broad overview of basically the data. The existing tree canopy is in dark green there, and that's the city and the ETJ combined. The reason I included that, I mentioned, was we're looking at the existing canopy in the city. So we started from this, we got this data, and then our GIS team developed a tool here the tree canopy coverage map. So they used tax parcel data from the county and overlaid that over the existing tree canopy data to basically get a snapshot of what the existing tree canopy is on an individual parcel. And a little more granular here, I zoomed in to Sullivan Park here. That's 55.5, just about % of Sullivan Park is covered in tree canopy. And you see the dark green, the aerial's turned on there. And I mentioned that's the city's imagery, where those are leaf off conditions. So there's trees with no leaves in the aerial there. So that green you're seeing is the data of the existing tree canopy. So let's see, and we can pull up the now or later, the actual tool and scroll around and look, but it's pretty much this simple. You click on a parcel and it gives you that information. So, oh, here we go. So this would be kind of the base. Just click on any old parcel. This would be kind of the starting point, starting from 0. What's my existing tree canopy? And we'll get into, so therefore you have to preserve. But at 317 North Justice Street, you've got 42% of that site's covered in tree canopy, 8,400 square feet. So there we go. Back to my PowerPoint, please. Just a quick note on existing landscaping requirements. Of course, we have landscaping requirements in our ordinance. Developers have to submit a tree survey showing that all trees 12 inches in diameter. There's parking lot landscaping requirements. There's various buffer requirements based on your proposed use. You can get credits towards landscaping requirements for preserving existing trees, but that's an incentive only. There's no requirement to preserve existing trees currently. There's street tree requirements in some areas, like the entry corridor overlay district. That's the main highways into town, and certain zoning districts. And there's open space landscaping and mixed use districts only. And as I mentioned, there's no requirement to preserve existing trees. So the proposed changes, a broad overview of these. There's tree preservation standards established. That's the big one. And we'll get into those in detail on the next slide, or the one right after. No tree survey required. So we're looking at tree canopy percentage instead of individual trees. Therefore, we don't need to see every single tree 12 inches in diameter. And I think that's a big benefit on the part of the developer, because that's something they normally have to do as they submit their application. You know, it's a cost up front and time up front that they're getting to skip now. You only have a plan showing the tree line. I've got an example of one of those on a later slide. There's no credit for invasive species. So if you have an invasive species on your site, you won't get credit towards new landscaping requirements. Trees used to meet new landscaping requirements. I put landscaping in there twice, sorry. Must be 75% native species. That's not the preservation requirement. I have a parking lot and I need 4 trees for my vehicular use area. 75% of those, so 3 in that case, would have to be native species. There's a new multifamily residential buffer to lower density residential. That's an 8-foot type A buffer that you may or may not be familiar with, but basically right now, residential to residential, even if it's a very dense apartment complex to a single family development, by the letter of the ordinance, there's no buffer required. A lot of times those get negotiated at council or something like that, but this would establish a standard for that. A new common open space landscaping requirement. Common open space typically required on most commercial developments, typically about 10% of the site. So in this case, it'd be 1 tree and 5 shrubs per 1,200 square feet. A new open space landscaping requirement. You typically see that. It's distinct from common open space. You typically see open space in PRD. It's typically 60% of the site. 1 tree and 5 shrubs per 4,000 square feet would be the new requirement there. And then street trees along all streets, unless of course you're exempt from the landscaping ordinance.
Daniel, question is,
Please.
bamboo an invasive species?
I believe it is. That would be based on, so when I say invasive species, I mean as listed on the recommended species list. I wonder if somebody knows off the top of their head whether bamboo is. It's bamboo.
All right, so,
Invasive.
and I know this is nitpicking, but sometimes bamboo serves as a great buffer. It's never to be considered, though?
There'd be no requirement to remove it.
But you
just
get
wouldn't
no points for it.
Yeah, you wouldn't get points towards your new, so correct, if there was a buffer required, a 10-foot type B buffer, and you needed so many trees in that buffer, you wouldn't get credit for your bamboo. That's correct.
I know some people hate it, and for the most part, it gets away, but I've just seen it where it worked. It's a nice sound barrier.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It just kind of grows up overnight, I understand, but I was just wondering how that factored in.
So getting into the meat of the proposed tree canopy preservation requirement, that's the bulk of the new requirements of this proposed ordinance. To start, it would not apply to development sites with 30,000 square feet or less of existing tree canopy. I mentioned that's a staff recommendation. The version that came out of the tree canopy study committee said on sites that are 2 acres or less. As staff reviewed that, there was some concern that that exempts a lot of sites, and also it's not exactly related to the existing conditions on the site. So regardless of how much canopy were on that 2-acre parcel, you know, that it wouldn't make as much sense to be the exemption threshold. So 30,000 square feet of existing tree canopy, regardless of the size of your site. So you have a 1-acre site, a 10-acre site. If you have less than 30,000 square feet of existing tree canopy, you wouldn't have to bother with tree canopy preservation. So that allows you to be a little more flexible if the existing canopy, if there's not a lot, but it's very inconveniently placed for you to put your driveway and your utilities in, it'll let you be a little more flexible. And I mentioned existing canopy is according to the most recent tree canopy cover assessment. You show that by looking at our tool. If there's no canopy data in our tool, you're outside of the city or the ETJ and you're annexing for some reason and the city's reviewing your development plan, then the developer submits a plan showing that. If you disagree with our tool, because there's some amount of approximation, I mentioned we're overlaying the data over county parcel data. So if you disagree, you say that's not the accurate canopy as of the date of your cover assessment, then you can submit a plan sealed by a professional showing the existing canopy. So there's kind of a 2-step approach to how much you have to preserve. And there's tier 1 and tier 2. Tier 1, you have to preserve 20% of the existing tree canopy. No fee in lieu unless you get a variance from the Board of Adjustment. So now here we are, I've got a 5-acre site, I've got 2 acres of existing tree canopy. You have to preserve 20% of that. You move on from there, and there's an additional requirement here in tier 2, and there's some flexibility. First, you can choose one of the 3 options. You can preserve another 10%, which equals 30% of existing tree canopy. So that tier 2 is based off of the entire existing, not the existing after the tier 1 requirement, if that makes sense. And I've got some more examples later. Or you can request a fee in lieu. So option 2 would be you preserve 5% of the existing tree canopy, but then you install a new 7%. You get to move it around, choose where it goes. So you get some flexibility. The city gets a little extra canopy out of it. And then option 3 is even more there. You can take all of the tier 2 existing canopy down, but you have to plant 15% now. I mentioned trees preserved are eligible for credits towards other landscaping requirements as long as you meet the criteria. So for instance, vehicular use area landscaping has to be within 20 feet of the vehicular use area. So if I've got a parking lot over here and a tree I'm preserving, 1,000 feet that way, it wouldn't count. But if it's close to my vehicular use area, I might get some credits there. You can request a fee in lieu for the tier 2 canopy. I've got some details on that. There may be a delay in your development approval for 3 years if all or substantially all the trees are removed in violation of the ordinance. And that's in there to put people on notice that there's going to be, that's one of the possible remedies. There's others. We could assess a civil penalty. We might try to get a court order or something like that. So we'll, assess it holistically when there's a violation, but that's one of the possible ones. And so here's an example of the tier 1 and tier 2 requirements combined. So I mentioned assume a 5-acre development site with 2 acres of existing tree canopy. And of course, the 5 acres is irrelevant because we're just looking at the 30,000 square feet of existing canopy. That's the threshold we care about. There's 2 acres of existing canopy. We're over that threshold, so you have to comply. Tier 1 is static for all the options, 17,424 square feet. That's 20% of the existing canopy. You have to preserve that. You get to choose which 17,000, but you have to preserve it. Tier 2, you've got your options there. The simplest one is to preserve another 8,700 for an additional 10%. That results in 30% of the existing tree canopy that you're preserving, so 26,000 and change. And you're done. But if you want some more flexibility, you can preserve 5% in the tier 2 requirement and plant an additional 7%. So that's in proportion to the total existing tree canopy. And you see there, the resultant tree canopy is 32% of the existing, which is 27,878, and so forth for option 3. So a very quick example, and I got some more detail on future slides, but I mentioned Henderson County EMS here because it's they had a plan that showed something that's helpful for this process, but B, it's a pretty good example of they preserved a lot of trees. It's probably compliant with this proposed ordinance. This was a 2017 plan when they built the new EMS building. I don't have the data of the existing canopy from before the approval, but this is a snapshot of the 2015 aerial, so before they built the new structure, and you can kind of see where the existing canopy is. That's a snapshot of it on our tool now, so they dug some of it out there to make room for the new building, but currently 30% of the site is covered in canopy. So, and again, the reason I show that is their landscaping plan here, highlighted, they showed their existing tree canopy present and to remain. So I'm sure you've seen the tree surveys come through on the various conditional rezoning applications with the different dots and 36-inch oak, et cetera. This would turn into a line on the plan. They would have to add some data. Of course, these requirements weren't in place. They just happened to submit this. So they would add the existing tree canopy to remain in acreage or square feet. So they're showing the area. They would assign an acreage to it or a square footage to it. They would have to list the total existing tree canopy so we could be sure that they're calculating the correct preservation amount. And if they're installing new canopy for one of those tier 2 requirements, they'd show that. So getting into the new canopy credits. So you have to plant new canopy. How do you calculate how much canopy you're getting per tree when you plant a new tree? This is a snapshot of the recommended species list. It's developed primarily by the tree board. Currently, it is a requirement for new landscaping requirements in our zoning ordinance. Basically, they have to come out of this recommended species list. So I've got a snapshot here of it's broken down by large, medium, and small maturing trees. It also gets into shrubs and flowers and other things, but we're concerned about trees here. So as an example here, these are medium maturing trees, and it lists them by species. So what we did here was look at the data on the North Carolina State Cooperative Extension's website. Here, it's got a lot of information about the tree. It also lists the mature dimensions of that tree. So we took the lower end of mature for these trees and assigned an average canopy to them. So for a Norwegian sunset maple, the lower end of mature for that is 177 square feet. And We did that for every single tree in the recommended species list. And then, so you have these, the averages of the various sizes. So the average size of a medium maturing tree is 350 square feet. If you plant a medium maturing tree on your site, you're going to get 350 square feet of canopy credit towards your new canopy installation requirement. Does that make sense?
Question. How do you, what qualifies as a planting? How big a tree? What size do they have to?
Yeah, they're
If you said that,
typically,
I apologize.
yeah, they're typically 1.5 inches to 2 inches diameter at breast height at planting, I believe. We don't set a new standard in this proposed ordinance. Yeah.
There are existing standards for tree plantings. They do vary depending on what's triggering. Like some of the open space requirements have slightly larger tree planting requirements. Some have slightly smaller, but basically between 1.5 to 3 inches DBH, which is diameter breast height, which is a standard way of measuring a nursery tree.
How do we come up with that?
That's
standard to use it as far as coming up
using
with-
DBH or
No, just as
picking
the
size?
survivability or whatever. I'm just curious as to, and are there any teeth in making sure they live or?
Yeah, there is, and Daniel will actually talk a little bit about well, maybe you won't actually in this presentation, but yes, there are standards for if a tree dies within a year after it's been planted, and zoning becomes aware of that, we can require that to be replanted. Lots of times planting is happening during the project or right at the end. We're going out and issuing a CO based on whether or not everything's alive. With subdivisions, sometimes that inspection includes that doesn't look like it's alive anymore, so you're going to need to replant that. And then there's a period of time, basically a 10-year tolling time frame, during which if we become aware of something that's died that was required, we can go out and say, hey, you've got a violation, you need to replant this tree. And we would require a similar new tree standard.
I like we need a tree SWAT team.
All right. So getting into the fee in lieu, and the reason I had those slides before it is that's relevant for the calculation of the fee in lieu. As I mentioned, the tier 2 requirement, you can request a fee in lieu for that. A note on fees, they are an exaction from the developer. So the fee in lieu there has to be a nexus towards the fee we're getting and the requirement that it's meant to, satisfy. There has to be a proportionality to how it's calculated and, again, what the requirement is that the fee is meant to satisfy. So the proposed fee is based on the cost for the city to plant new canopy to replace the existing canopy that's been removed. So you're removing your tier 2 canopy, as much as 10% of it. So we want to replace that somewhere else. I took a weighted average of those. I mentioned the square footages of the different large, medium, and small maturing trees, because we're not going to plant all large maturing trees. We're going to plant some medium and small. It takes more small maturing trees to get to a certain canopy percentage. So they mean more in the calculation of the average size, if that makes sense. So I have in there the table of how many of those trees it takes to get to an acre. It doesn't really matter. It's the same weight for any set area you use. So the weighted average based on those is 228.84 square feet per tree. Assuming the city's average cost to plant a tree is $350, we get an average replacement canopy of 228.84 square feet per tree planted, which equals $1.53 per square foot of tree canopy. So the calculation would be, I'm taking down 8,712 square feet of canopy. That's my tier 2 requirement. That's the entirety of it. I am going to pay $1.53 a square foot, $13,329.36. And then option 2 there is I plant some canopy, 7%. I'm still chopping down 5%, and I want to pay a fee, so half that. All right. I got some of those things. These are your slides.
Yep. So just wanted to go over, so you heard that this was taken to planning board. The planning board received the draft revision ordinance that, or the draft ordinance from the Tree Ordinance Revision Committee as it had been developed going into the latter part of January. And staff, community development staff, my staff reviewed that ordinance prior to the planning board, kind of to put our eyes on it and offer feedback. We had a couple of things. The first is just a clarification. It's called the recommended planting list. It really probably ought to be called the approved planting list. It's not recommended, it's required. And through this process, that's how it would work. So relatively minor clarification, but one that in reviewing the document, that was something that we had presented. The planning board was supportive of that. We also, in working with landscape architects and engineers on a regular basis, would request that there be some way of reviewing the approved planting list on a regular basis with feedback from the development community, because they're the ones that are often obtaining plants, et cetera. This is not related to the ordinance. Specifically, it wouldn't be anything that would go into the ordinance, but would be just a process element. This next item is one in which there is disagreement. But it was talked about during the tree revision committee, and we wanted to make sure that it made its way into the discussion at the planning board, which is currently in conditional zoning district review. There is a line in the Article 7 in our zoning ordinance under development review that highlights that the tree board may provide recommendations to city council for CZDs. And that now is achieved by bringing the document CZD application to the tree board as a part of the process. So to keep that, sort of a timeline in which the tree board is sort of the first to review and planning board is second and city council the third, it requires that the applicant meet the submittal deadline, and then that document goes to the tree board basically about 2 weeks later, and then goes to planning board the following month and to city council the month after that. In the committee, there was a discussion of removing this step from the process, and we wanted to highlight that, from an administrative perspective, along with the removal of the tree survey requirement, these would be the two main, developer clarity pieces that would be offered in the adoption of new ordinance standards or new ordinance pieces. So from a staff perspective, we just didn't want that to be missed. So the planning board was not supportive of that piece of the puzzle. So we had one where they were supportive and one where they were not. And that'll all come to you in the recommendation from the planning board. And I'm happy to answer any other questions about that. We have one other that I wanted to talk about, and this was the exemption standard alignment. And we Daniel talked about the 30,000 specifically. At the planning board, we did also talk about exempting projects which disturbed less than an acre. But after talking with the legal team on the back end of that meeting, basically making the recommendation that the 30,000 square foot would be the trigger. And we did do a little work. I knew that one would be, kind of interest. I give a lot of credit to the GIS folks. They're really quite adept with those tools. We looked at how many parcels in the city are 2 acres are greater than 2 acres. And that is about 5% of the parcels in the city. And parcels which have 30,000 square feet of canopy or more is about 10 or 11% of the parcels in the city. So you're basically looking, I think we have over, I want to say like 11,800 some, give or take. I can give the exact number in just a second. Parcels within the city and ETJ, 11,235 parcels in the ETJ and city combined. 567 are 2 acres or greater, and 1,341 have 30,000 square feet of canopy or more. So in both cases, a relatively targeted application of the canopy preservation standard. Administratively, we believe that the 30,000 square feet offers additional design flexibility because you could have a 20-acre site, and if you have 10,000 square feet of poorly located tree canopy, it could really impact your ability to do design on the site. Conversely, smaller sites where you're more constrained by just the size of the site, the 30,000 square feet works out to be about 3/4 of an acre. So this general standard was supported by the planning board. There's a couple of things just reviewing. This is just planning board review and recommendation. What we did, they did talk about the project for quite a bit, and I've already noted that they supported 2 out of those 3. I think that covers them. If there, I'll stop talking and see if there's any questions. See, I let Daniel do most of the talking today. So.
What is the point in creating an ordinance, with all these things in place, if developers are still going to have to go before the tree board? And is that what I'm understanding? They did not agree with that piece of it?
Yeah, so we can go back to the very first slide just to talk about a little bit of the reasons. So many of the discussion points at the tree board are related to the preservation of existing trees and planting requirements, but not all. And so, from the discussion at the revision committee level was, with the adoption of the new standards, do we remove some of the oversight that's involved in the process? And there's, I think, just disagreement on whether or not the newly adopted standards cover all of the items that the tree board comments on and makes recommendations on in their review. The product that came out of the tree revision committee is clearly a compromise, right? So there were a lot of different viewpoints and perspectives on that committee, and there are both preservation standards and new planting standards that are part of those recommendations. And so, it's a compromise, and as such,
Not a dirty word.
right? Yeah, exactly. As such, there are new standards, and part of the discussion was that with the new standards, some of the sort of process-related elements that developers currently have to go through would be removed.
Because if boards change, opinions change, But if you have an ordinance, I think if you run into problems, then you go back and you have council amend the ordinance to address those things. But I just really think if council is going to go along with everyone and create this and approve it, I don't think a developer should have to go before another board if staff sees and it is in their opinion that they're adhering to the standards. Just my opinion on it. And this was something I wanted way back when I was still on council originally, and we just ran out of time. And I like this, and I'd like to see it in place, but I'd really like people to know what they're dealing with instead of coming in and kind of being left up for interpretation. It's my opinion.
I would just like to add that the tree board also advises on the ecological concerns of our tree canopy. And that's big. I've been involved with the tree board for a number of years, and I'm still the liaison, and I've did a lot of work with the tree board in planting trees, beautifying Hendersonville, and I just don't see the reason why we need to exclude the tree board.
Debbie, do you understand? I don't want to exclude the tree board. I'm not saying get rid of it, because you guys, the tree board does incredible work. And I just think if we're going to create an ordinance, it shouldn't, somebody shouldn't have to continue to go back through that as long as there's not just some glaring issue here. This is a compromise. And I'm sure some people aren't happy. Probably no one's real happy, but there's something you can work with. And by no means do I want to say the tree board is not effective and can't do anything. I think they've done a good job in helping create this. But let's take one piece of the process out of it and see what happens. And if a year from now you have to amend this, you certainly can to include some things. But it's kind of the point of it.
I agree with you on that. If the ordinance is in place, if the staff and the planning board agree that it's all been, you've checked everything off, and they follow the ordinance, what more can the tree board say? What else could they add to it? If it follows the ordinance, it'll be approved. The tree board can't say, oh, well, we'd really don't like it after all. Nope, they followed the ordinance, so the tree board can't go back and change their mind on that. Now, the details of it, that could be modified in the future.
Yes,
If it looks like it's not working out the way we hope it is, you can change the ordinance, change the requirements.
Debbie, you mentioned the ecological benefits of the tree canopy, I believe is what you were talking about. Can you give some examples of what some of the ecological issues that you're addressing that are not already in the ordinance that I've read so far? So you mentioned that part of this was examining the ecologic benefits of the tree canopy. So I'm just wondering what some of those.
It's the tree board is, we got a lot of insight as far as the arborist.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't understand that.
Arborist.
Yes.
Yes, they study, like the neighborhood woods. They come out and advise and educate, and
Right. But I'm saying like that you said like specifically the ecologic benefits. So I'm just trying to understand what those are that are not already.
Yeah, if you're
cited.
seeing where they're not addressed
Like
here,
what-
because what you're
what
saying can
examples
still
of
happen.
those?
yes,
What?
yes.
No, what would those be though?
So that's what I'm saying. The education part of it, understanding.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this would not negate that in any way.
I actually
That-
think
yeah,
if
you'd have more
you're,
time to
you'd
do
have
that.
more time to do the education and the
Yeah.
other things and the other programs that tree board's doing, like the Bradford Pear Bounty, like that. I know there's a lot of help from the extension office, but that still takes a lot of time to be able to do programs like that, and you would have more time to do all of those things if you're not hearing these projects.
Plus your arborists were involved in the decisions on the trees.
Yes.
And, you know, the
Yes, they
canopy
were.
coverage. So none of the, we don't want any of that to stop on all the stuff that goes on outside of that. We're just trying to create a set of guidelines, let people work by them. If somewhere down the line you guys need to go in and tweak it, you certainly can tweak it.
I will say the group did a really good job of coming together and going through all the different pieces and making some compromises. And when we started the meetings, I had said, I'll be happy if when we leave this room, everybody is a little bit unhappy. And that's exactly what happened. Everyone left the room equally unhappy. So I felt like it was the best compromise that we could come to. And I feel like we did it in a relatively short amount of time, considering how many people were in that room. But I think one of the biggest parts of the compromise is not having these projects go in front of the tree board. And I understand the concerns of the tree board not hearing them, but I think that we've gotten this in such a place that I'm happy with if they're meeting these requirements, then I feel like they've done what we want them to do. And like the mayor said, there's not much, there's other parts of the landscaping ordinance. I know the tree board wants to address things like that, but as far as canopy preservation goes, I feel like this has done a really good job to do what we want them to do. And it makes it clearer for the developers when they come in because they know up front. So now they don't have the risk of going into the tree board meeting and they make recommendations and then they get in here with us and then we spend an hour talking about the best DBH for a tree, which is not really our place.
And just to confirm, the goal of the tree ordinance and the tree canopy ordinance, is it to maintain the tree canopy that we have? Is it to increase the canopy? If that is the case, what percentage are you guys trying to increase the tree canopy? Just some data that I've read says, nationwide goals are between 30 and 40%, and American Forestation is no longer recommending anything over 40% because it then has negative effects as far as development and affordable housing and things like that. But so what is the goal? Is it to maintain or is it to increase? And then I guess my question is, at what rate do you see the increase happening percentage-wise by implementing this ordinance with the different, like, option A, B, or,
So the way that this is written now, I would say is more to maintain.
Okay.
We're not, because you're only saving at most 30% of the tree canopy that's there. So you're not really planting anymore, even if you're planting the additional in the tier 2. So I would say it's to maintain. I know that when we got the Parks Master Plan, they had wanted to increase our parks canopy to 50%. I think that's a great goal. And I think that we could achieve that through the fee in lieu that folks may be paying in this. So I think it's about maintaining and also, I guess, reconfiguring where the tree canopy is, because then we can kind of push it into our parks and public.
Could also eliminate some of the invasive because it doesn't count. So there's an incentive now to bump that and then come back with
Yes.
something that does count, that does provide a real canopy.
Exactly.
and we can have that discussion with the parks topic
Yeah,
too, but just, I think having reasonable expectations and like driven by science and data too, like 50% seems maybe, just from everything that I'm reading, not a normal average of.
But 50% in the park.
That's
So
just the
that's
parks.
not 50% overall.
So that's just the parks. Yeah.
So
No,
then-
I'm thrilled. I appreciate the work. It's something I think we needed to have, and I'm
yeah,
happy
the group
about
worked
it.
real hard. And I think not having to get the tree survey, that's going to save some money and some time. And then additionally, if they don't have to go in front of the tree board, then that saves some money and some time. And so you may have to plant a few more trees or get a little bit more creative with your design, but you don't have to do those things. So I think it's a good give and a take between the two groups.
Yeah. Good work.
Is there any additional guidance for staff that we need to bring back for next week, or it sounds like we're good to go there?
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Unless there's something you'd like input on. No.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. If there are no further questions, we're at the end of our agenda.